Evening and welcome to the March 7th meeting of the Minnetonka Planning Commission. The Commission generally meets on the first and third Thursdays of the month. The schedule and tentative agendas can be obtained by calling the Planning Division or checking the city website at minnetonka.gov. The Commission holds public hearings on land use applications. From a specific process standpoint, that means we make recommendations to the City Council on rezonings, subdivisions, conditional use permits, and amendments to the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations. We also make final decisions on site plans, signage requests, variance requests, expansion permits unless these requests are part of an application that must be heard by the City Council. In that case, the Commission makes a recommendation and the Council makes the final action. In addition to these formal actions, the Commission also provides informal feedback on development and concept plans. Unlike other land use applications, Commission feedback on concept plans occurs without any formal motion or votes. The city notifies property owners within at least 400 feet of the sites, posts signs on the properties, and places notices in the Sun Sailor. Any aggrieved party may appeal a final Planning Commission decision to the City Council. If you wish to appeal, you must submit a written request to the city within 10 days of this meeting. From a broader standpoint, the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations are the city's best efforts to codify a balance between individual rights and community responsibilities. Individual rights are easy to understand. Community responsibilities are more subtle, but the idea is that we as members of the community agree to limit our individual rights for the common good of the group. The Community Development Department, the Planning Commission, and the City Council are charged with managing this sometimes difficult balancing act. We ask that you keep this broader perspective in mind as we review tonight's applications. Again, welcome. And staff, please call the roll.
Maxwell is excused. Minion?
Here.
Waterman is excused. Banks?
Here.
Hanson?
Here.
Henry? Sorry, I got that out of order. Here. And Chair Sewell is also excused tonight. So we have 4 commissioners. Thank you.
Great, and I believe that is just barely enough to do what we need to do for the citizens of Minnetonka tonight. So, with that, I do believe we have a change to our agenda. Mr. Gordon, would you want to walk us through that at all?
Yes, Chair and Commissioners, there's been a change memo for this evening, and you'll also note that we are now posting those change memos and pushing those through to your Granicus system, so you'll see those digitally from now on. But the change memo tonight is for item 8A, and that was the Minnetonka Corporate Center sign plan. After a discussion with the applicant earlier this week, they've decided to withdraw their application to proceed with those sign plan amendments. So that is off the agenda, and by de facto, 8B becomes 8A for tonight's meeting. That's all I have, Chair.
Great. I'll look for a motion to amend our agenda then.
Before I do that, just a question for Lauren too. Is the policy now changed so we are going to get those change memos electronically? And then until how shortly before the meeting do the change memos come in that they'll be available electronically? Yeah,
so good questions, Commissioner Henry. The change to do it electronically we think is helpful for as commissioners, is also helpful to just the packet going forward as well. It'll be in the afternoon, usually on Thursday. Sometimes we've pushed out change memos to you by email, and we'll follow up with a phone call just to let you know it's there if we have an item that has a lot of comment on it that wasn't included in the packet that was published on Friday. But typically it'll be like a Thursday afternoon prior to the meeting, sort of a push.
It's good news. Thank you.
Yeah, great question for process and transparency. So with that, just look for a motion to amend.
I'd like to make a motion to amend.
In a second.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And that carries. So our agenda is updated for tonight. And then with that, Mr. Gordon, I'll turn it over to you for a report from staff. Oh, Then, skipped an item. Commissioners, would you like any changes to our minutes from the February 22nd, 2024 meeting? Seen a lot of shaking your head. I'll look for a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Sorry, sorry, Mr. Gordon. Now, let's turn it over to you. I was excited. Mr. Gordon, I'd say the same for me. Mine's stuck on. So,
Mine's also on.
Jeff, if you're hearing us, can you override me? There it goes. Okay, now we're good. Okay, Chair and Commissioners, a few things for tonight from the last Planning Commission meeting that came to the council this past week on the 4th. We had the accessory dwelling unit on the Knollway Drive that you had recommended approval of. Council also approved that. And then the other item was the Woodhaven subdivision on Plymouth Road. That was the 5-lot subdivision on the west side of Plymouth Road. That was approved by the City Council. Kind of similar discussion about some drainage and traffic the council had with that, but they were satisfied with the plat, that it met all the requirements, so that went through on a unanimous approval vote as well. So that'll come back for final plat. The final plat just goes to the council for approval. That'll probably happen here in the near future as well. Our next meeting is on March 21st. We'll have a number of items for you to review at that meeting as well. That's all I have tonight, Chair.
great. Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Commissioners, anything that you would like to report tonight? Looks like Commissioner Henry.
Thanks, Chair. I do. On Tuesday, March 12th, the city will have a community solar workshop, and people can attend either in person or there is a webinar link. If you can't join in person, we'd be happy to have you there virtually too. As a member of the Sustainability Commission, I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't mention that. So look to see a lot of people there.
And just so I ask, is that here at City Hall?
Thank you. Yes, it is in the community center.
Great. Moving on. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, great. Next, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Before we move along in the process, just a kind of a brief recap of consent agenda items. Consent agenda items are items that tend to be more routine in nature, and if we have a bulk of them or more than one, we pass those items with one motion. Tonight we do just have one item on our consent agenda. So, commissioners or anyone in the audience, if you'd like to pull this item, please let us know, and then we can pull it for further discussion. But assuming we can leave it on the consent agenda. Okay, with that, Mr. Gordon, is this a voice vote, or do we take a recorded vote? Just remind me.
Yeah, you can just make a motion and approve it, and I'll read it off individually.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take a motion to approve items 7A, our consent agenda items.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Banks,
I'll second.
second by Henry.
Yeah, okay, Minion,
Yes.
Banks,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Chair Hansen.
Yes, great. Awesome. All right. So item 7A is approved then. So now,
Yep, you're all done.
Okay, good.
thanks for coming.
Thanks, I just needed to do my due diligence for my clients. So
Yeah.
we have nothing else that we need to do, we can sell the property. Very good, thank you.
Thanks and good luck with your project. Tough to get a seat here tonight, so. All right. Before we begin consideration of the non-consent agenda item, let's just briefly review the steps in the process. First, the item will be announced and staff will report on the subject. Then our commission will ask questions. Next, the applicant will be invited to make a presentation or offer any comments, and commissioners can ask additional questions at that time. After the applicant is finished, the public hearing will be opened to give anyone present the opportunity to comment on the proposal, and if you wish to speak, please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Once everyone has spoken, we may allow speakers to return for additional comments at larger meetings, and neighborhood spokespeople are encouraged and will be given up to 15 minutes to present. The public hearing will then be closed and no further comments will be allowed. So the commission will then discuss the proposal and take an action. So tonight, our only non-consent agenda item is item 8B now, an ordinance amending non-commercial sign regulations. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. This is an amendment to the sign regulations in the zoning code. It's section 32506. And again, just to preview where we're headed, we're recommending approval of the ordinance amendment to the City Council. A few things just to kind of precede the specifics of the language here. This was really a conversation that happened about a year and a half ago, and that as a response to changes in voting in Minnetonka. And at that time, Minnetonka had gone through a process where ranked choice voting was put on the ballot for the voters of the city to vote up or down. And as you know, that was approved by the voters. So ranked choice voting is part of now our structure for elections for local races. As a response to what kind of comes out of ranked choice voting, we looked at changes that we may want to consider to the sign ordinance. And that's really the result of more people being on a ballot for any particular office, if it's a city council or a school board, as an example, is the two that we used in the staff report. So with the ability to have more people running and the limitation on the amount of signage you can have on your property, that's currently 3 signs. These are non-commercial signs as the code defines them. So 3 signs is the limit. As noted in the staff report, there are a number of elections where you could have had, upwards of 10 people or more, running for office that may have been supported at that time. So we had a study session with the council. We talked about how should we respond to this, or do we need to respond to it? And at that time, there wasn't really interest to change the code, or there wasn't a decision made to kind of move forward with that. So we just left the code as it was. Now we're coming up on another election cycle where we have opportunities for more signage again, and we thought we would revisit it one more time. And so we took it to the council for their input, and we kind of gave 2 options for looking at changes to the ordinance. The first would be on the screen here. Option 1 was reflecting what the state law allows, which is essentially no regulation. So people running for offices, residents that wanted to support any of those number of people could have as many signs for that candidate on their property with no regulation from the city. The second option was to basically increase the number that we already regulate at 3 to 6, basically doubling the signage. So after some discussion, the council thought maybe option 2 is a better option. A lot of things about Minnetonka with signage is we're kind of restrictive as compared to other communities on our signage. And this was a little bit more in the spirit of that than not having any regulation. So that was the discussion in January with the council. So at a staff level, we took that and put together the ordinance that's on the screen here that would change the temporary non-commercial signage And again, this is kind of an election item in terms of when we see the most amount of signage on residential property, but it could be for anything. The election was maybe the example that was used the most because that's when signs usually show up on residential property, but you could have any other non-commercial type of message on your property all year round, 6 signs, 36 square feet total in size, up to 3 feet in height, and that could be year round. But again, the election signage is where this came from, so we continue to use that as an example. So this is the changes that we're recommending, and again, it's for your consideration tonight as Planning Commission. If you want to make changes to that, have other input on it, this is the time for discussion, and then making a recommendation to the City Council. So pretty straightforward. So we're recommending, again, you recommend the City Council adopt that proposed amendment to increase the signage essentially double from what it is today. So, Chair, I'll turn it back to you with any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Commissioners, any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Henry.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, does this mean if we vote to adopt the second option here, it's only good for the non-general election years, and then still in general election years, there is no maximum limit to the number of signs nor square footage on people's private property?
Yeah, so Commissioner Henry and Planning Commissioners, the state law has a lot of language in there about the number of signs that can be posted on a property for elections. And those have limits on when you start it and then when you end it. So it's kind of the middle bullet point here. 46 days before the election, 10 days after the election, they have to be pulled. So many of these would require compliance with that. Other signage in the community that isn't
Hello,
election
my name is
related
Dr. Michael
would be
DeSanctis.
out
I'm a
there all
licensed
the time.
psychologist. I'm also certified in behavior
so
sleep medicine.
this is,
And I am
one of
here
those
to talk
situations, I
about the
think, where
effects
the
of drowsy
signage
driving.
is not,
Drowsiness is a direct function of what people have done in the past 24 hours in terms of sleep.
I'll just leave
If
it
a
there.
person has gone
You could have a lot
18,
of
19,
signs
20 hours in a row
So to clarify,
without sleeping, there is a process called homeostatic sleep pressure, and that just builds and builds and builds. It's an inevitable pressure that may cause people to actually fall asleep for very, very brief periods, a matter of seconds, and they may not even be aware of it.
No, that we do have to follow state, yeah.
Okay, so last clarifying question is then in general election years versus what we are agreeing to here, it's going to be a
There's
little
actually a fair amount of research on the effects of sleep deprivation on performance in a laboratory or in a driver simulation test. And one major
Just for a
study
real
done
quick,
some years ago
the page
found
is up right
that
now. I
if
think
people
you
were
said
awake
it looks like it
over
was
17 to 18 hours,
understand the
even
36
after a good night's sleep the night before, they showed impairment
Something like
in
this,
reaction
put the
time
36
and
square feet
processing of
into the,
information. And
maximum
when
number of signs.
the amount
They're
of
just
sleep
saying,
deprivation was
gotcha.
inched up even a little
That
bit
helps,
more,
thank you.
people went from an
then
alcohol
the reason that they
equivalent
don't
of
have the ratio
0.05
displayed
blood
on the 13
alcohol
different
to an
cities that
equivalent
used
of
it, for
0.1 in
example,
terms of how they
ratio.
performed
I assume
on
we
these
just wanna
tests.
default back to the
A
same.
1998 expert
Correct,
panel
yeah.
on driver fatigue and sleepiness identified some characteristics of crashes that relate to drowsy driving. They found that these crashes
number of
often
approaches
involve
for
a single
signage and
vehicle leaving the roadway with a driver who is alone in the vehicle and does not attempt to avoid the crash.
Timeframes, yeah, kind of vary as well.
There is no question that on an individual basis, when individuals are feeling the pressure of work and school demands, family demands, multiple role demands, they may actually find themselves going to sleep at an hour past their biologically primed opportunity to sleep. So people are pushing the envelope. Because we
Yeah, Chair and Commissioners, we And I'll go back to elections again, because that's usually when we have the most temporary non-commercial sign enforcement is we take those on a complaint basis. We're not out looking for violations. Sometimes we'll come across those. The ones that we will take action on if we don't have a complaint are the ones that are safety issues. If they're at an intersection, kind of blocking visibility, we will remove those or move them back on the property. So that's kind of the first level of enforcement. With the complaints, we usually have a call that comes in. We'll log those usually for a few days. We'll go out and do a sign sweep usually once a week and take out all of the signs or tag them, flag them as illegal. And then we do have a ability to pull them and keep them too. If people want them back, we will hold them. They can purchase them back. That's kind of how we operate. So that happens regularly during the election season. So we typically aren't going to run out on a complaint one-off and pull a sign at a moment's notice. It's not real efficient that way. So education is usually the best way to give information about where to put signs, and people are getting better about that, I think, in my experience over time.
Commissioner Henry?
Thank you. A few more. Commissioner Minion brought up a good point. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this one and that our audience is clear too. If we vote to agree on the second of the two options, it does say in the table that the duration of display is not applicable. So are we voting to say that they can keep them up as long as they want to?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, good. So just want to make sure all the commissioners are clear. And
Yeah, except for when the state, has regulations. So it's still the 46 days for the state prior to the election and then 10 after. So the state law is always going to be in place. Yeah.
okay, so what we're voting on here, if we do number two, some of what we're voting on is more restrictive than the state and some is less restrictive than the state, it sounds like.
I would say I would agree, yes. This language that's shown on the screen here really is more applicable to any sign, anytime, not just narrowly focused on the election signage. So we always have to default to the state statute for election signage.
Oh, so in non-general election years, if there is a political sign in somebody's yard, they have to have it off 10 days after the election?
In non-general election years, when we're not having a primary, as an example, we'll default to this language. And where the state or federal, election is in place, then we have to comply with the state law, which would allow more.
Could I try and say it maybe like, Mr. Gordon, what I'm hearing is the city's not doing anything prescriptive or restrictive in our language, but there is additional language in state statute, or state is how I would think about that, is restrictive. So we're not doing anything specifically, but the state is.
The state is in general election years, but in the non-general election years, when we have school board and city council elections, what we're saying is that homeowners can keep those signs up as long as they want to.
That would be true for locals, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
good to know. Also, in the packet, and help me understand maybe the discombobulation here, but in page 5 of the packet, or it's page 7 of 13 in the specific one about the notes in the city council meeting, where it says that Wilburn moved and Calvert seconded a motion to introduce the ordinance with option 1 and refer it to the planning commission, and they all voted yes. Is that just, am I wrong in thinking that the city council is implying that they would prefer option 1? Or is that a typo and they should have said option 2 in that page? Or is it something that I'm not interpreting correctly? You mentioned before that the city council.
Chair Henry and Commissioner Henry, I did not pick up the minutes that were included in the packet and how that was stated. It was, in terms of the number, it was certainly not to allow the no regulation approach was the option 2, which is the regulatory approach. So if that's a typo in the minutes, I'm not sure. Just noting
are you seeing this
one
as
or
a-
one or two.
This is on page 5 in the
Yeah,
minutes.
I do see that now.
Okay, just to clarify, so it sounds like it should be 2, or it's not implying
Correct.
that the council was favoring option number 1 at least.
Correct.
Okay. Got a couple more, if it's okay, Chair.
Let it ride.
Since the ranked choice voting passed a couple years ago, what have the citizen complaints look like about the restrictive policy in terms of having so few yard signs possible in their yards? Have we seen increased complaints from citizens about that, or has it stayed pretty much constant before versus after the ranked choice decision?
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner Henry, I think we've heard a few complaints about I can't provide all of the candidate signage that I'd like to, that represents who I would endorse. So we've heard a little bit of that. I don't know that I would characterize that as being broad and real deep with those comments, but there have been a few.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, from the minutes, I think it was Councilperson Calvert talked about the question of political signs on public property, so on the non-private property. The note said that Julie would address that. She's not here, but is that something that we can discuss or ask you about?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So, Chair and Commissioners, we don't allow political signage or any non-commercial signage on residential or on public properties, and that would be city property, property owned by the county. It's common out here on Minnetonka Boulevard to have signs within the county's right-of-way or the rail authority's right-of-way. So those are commonly placed and pulled.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Wiersum mentioned the need for enforcement, adding language to this right now. It looks like we're just voting on the numbers as far as what people can put in. Time restrictions are none in this case, but is there a possibility that we could add a rider to this and talk about what enforcement needs to happen? Or is that beyond the scope of what we're voting on today?
It's a good question, Commissioner Henry. The enforcement mechanism in the zoning code is broadly applied to all of the sections. And if you're in violation of the code, then there are certain steps that have to be taken to notice, correct, or or have penalties within the parameters of the code. So I don't know that finding a specific enforcement and penalty type approach just for signage is an approach that's probably legal to distinguish that differently than the rest of the provisions of the code. So I would say probably shouldn't consider that.
The reason I
I would
ask,
lean on the attorney for that as well, but I'm going to guess that's probably the answer that's going to.
the reason I ask is because in prior city council elections, there's been complaints by candidates for city council that their opponent was putting signs on public property or they were putting it too close to the road. And in elections, time is of the essence. And to do a speedy review of that to make sure that the elections are fair, I just hate to see, let's say, somebody skirting the rules, putting it in where they shouldn't be, and then having to wait a week for a sweep to happen to take it out. Meanwhile, it has visibility for that week, and it could influence people's decision in the election. So I know we're not going to solve everything here, but I do like that the mayor brought it up in terms of enforcement. I think we need to have something specific to political signs ahead of elections, not just to say, well, we'll get to it when we get to it, because I'm all for fair elections, and this could go a long way to do that.
That to me, that tone probably gets noted, and then hopefully our city council members hear that comment, and maybe we can debate it amongst themselves in a couple weeks. So
Yeah.
That was my intent, to make sure people understood that. I'm glad my tone came through. Thanks, Chair.
no, it's very positive too. It's well intended. Chair, or Commissioner Henry.
Oh, thank you.
Keep going.
Thank you. Let's see, in the city council meeting, Commissioner Shack mentioned about duplicate signs, and there's no provision in there for not putting in duplicate signs. Is that something that we could put in the provision as well?
Commissioner Henry, the non-commercial signage, like any other signage, relies on not discriminating based on the content of the sign. So if we were using what's written on the sign as our basis for enforcement, that would be basically interpreting the sign's content, which we can't do. Federal law prohibits that. So in your scenario, what I'm hearing is if you want to have 6 of the same candidate signs in your yard, the code would allow you to do that. And as staff enforcing the code, we couldn't we couldn't go out and say you have to pick one candidate. That's not permissible. If we were doing that and saying, or one scenario, if we had language like that, that would probably be thrown out in court for having language like that, because that's illegal. And if we were applying the code that way, that would also be illegal. So yeah, six is the choice, and you can pick your flavors, based on the number and the size.
Thank you.
I'll come back. I maybe just want to make sure I understand this, because I thought it was interesting as I read the packet that Edina says 1 sign per candidate. And so how do I square that circle of our city says, no, we're not interpreting that language, but then a city 10 minutes away says, nope, 1 sign per candidate.
Yeah, I was not.
So maybe something to think about
Yeah.
as we go through the next couple weeks. I
Not
guess.
clued into that, and
Always
that
interesting
would be
to see the
that would be an
cities-
interesting court case. I
Yes,
think.
interesting to see the cities compare and contrast. So that stood out to me as like very restrictive. So turn it back over to my co-host tonight.
No, thanks, Chair. That was going to be a follow-up question of mine, so thanks for bringing that up. I think it was a good compliment, but that's all the questions I have for now.
Great. Very thorough. So kind of want to get stuff like this right, so it's easy for future candidates to not screw it up, right? So, okay, great. With that, any other questions, commissioners, for staff? Doesn't seem like it. We will then open the public hearing, and I don't believe we have anybody on the phone, so seeing nobody in audience, we will close the public hearing then. Commissioners, I guess I'll turn it over to us as a team. Any comments or discussion we'd like to have before contemplating any action? So, Commissioner Banks, you want to bat lead off?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Lauren, for the presentation and also answering all of the tough questions. I know as we look at this, we're being asked to consider one of 2 options, and the recommended option is really just, increasing 2 values from what we have currently. So a lot of questions about violations and things that you answered, really appreciate it, because it gives us a lot of insight and information into the policies, but understanding that really we're kind of just focused on, do we want to increase the maximum number of signs? From the 2 options, well, for one, I believe the increase is warranted, especially with the ranked choice voting and the number of candidates that we're seeing increase in races. So I'm glad we're addressing this with the signs. And with the 2 options we have before us, I think certainly to say no maximum and increase the height to, I believe it was 6 feet, doesn't seem like the best choice of the 2. One one concern with the max height of going to 6, as you mentioned, obstruction of view with traffic and things of that nature. So leaving it at 3 seems right. And then the increase from 3 to 6, that seems about the right number as well. And the area, in doubling the area, I think it gives our residents more options, more choices for, how they want to present who they support, which is great. But I also think that it's not having no limits, gives us the framework to work with. So I think the option 2 is what I would support tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Banks. Commissioner Henry or Commissioner Minion, any thoughts you guys want to add? Commissioner Minion, fire away.
I have to say I was a bit confused as to why we didn't have a duration of display, but it makes sense to have it set up the way it is, so you can have, I support the police, or around my house there's quite a few of the window cleaning companies, and I think it fits really well. I think it's really like the 3-foot height is another good thing, and it's a good setup. I like the way it is, and I'm supportive of it.
Great. Commissioner Henry?
Thanks. Just to reiterate a couple of comments I mentioned in the questions that was implying my views on this one, I'll just make sure that it's clear to the listening audience. But I would like to see a duration of display added for political signs, specifically for candidates in an election, for a city election, to match what we have for the state law. So 10 days after an election, I think, is quite reasonable. There's no reason for them to remain up longer. So Commissioner Minion, I agree with you 100%, where if they have non-commercial signs that say I support something, or just to say something else non-election related, they can have those up as long as they want to. But let's make a differentiation here. I think it's important for the city, and the citizens will like that better. Duplicate signs, it's not a battle I'm willing to fall down on the sword on. I think it's cleaner if they don't do that. If there's a house that had 6 of the same sign for one candidate, I'd probably be inclined to vote the other way. It just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But if that's what they want to, I'm all for free speech too, so I can see that. But my personal opinion would be to follow what Edina has and say 1 sign per candidate. It just seems cleaner, more reasonable. Enforcement, I would like to have a more discussion on that one. Like the Chair mentioned, have City Council address that. Even the mayor brought it up, so let's have more of a debate about that in the City Council meeting. One idea I'd like to see pursued perhaps is maybe you'd have on the bottom of each candidate's sign to say, in violations, text so-and-so number to this address, and then the city can get those, and maybe somebody in the Public Works Department can speedily look at those violators and not have something sitting out a week right before the election. That could possibly sway somebody's opinion. I'm not sure what the exact solution is, but something similar to that I think would be helpful to everybody. So that's what I've got. If we, minimally today, if we can add language to say that political signs need to be taken down 10 days after the election, I'd be fully in support of this.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Henry. Commissioner Minion?
Thank you. That's a great point. I think essentially as what you're saying is that we should establish this another table, 1 for political and 1 for non-commercial. That's a wonderful idea. Something that I observed in the last election is that there were a number of signs that were placed within that 5-foot zone, and somebody had gone through and just picked them up and thrown them down. So I'm not sure how we do enforcement as far as fining or anything like that, but and I'm not sure who had done that, but I would see that on a regular, as I drive around different places, there'd be different signs that were laid down, and they were literally within 2 feet of the street. So somebody's out there doing something in regards to it. Not who or how or what, I'm not sure, but it's just, I thought that was an effective way. They didn't steal the sign, they didn't take the sign back, but it was still there, and it was basically a safety issue people could see. And I thought that was a really good use of somebody's resources.
Yeah, and if we can make clarify the language in this where if there is a sign within that 5-foot range, I agree 100%, it's a safety issue. But if there's a violation and somebody takes action, do they pull it up and lay it flat, or do they pull it up and put it further than 5 feet away from where somebody else put it up originally? I'm not sure what the best answer is, but hopefully the city council can take up that issue as well.
Great. Any other? Mr. Gordon? Go ahead.
Maybe just to, before you get to a vote, I don't normally interject, but just to clarify a few things with the ordinance on definitions, because that's a critical part of signage. So we're talking about non-commercial signage, and we have a definition for non-commercial signage, and that is, it's any sign that is not a commercial sign. So think of a business, you know, a window cleaning company, that would be a commercial sign. Including but not limited to signs that convey messages concerning political, religious, social, ideological, public service, and informational topics. So it's a really wide spectrum of non-commercial interests that are part of this ordinance. We don't define campaign sign. We don't define political sign. We don't define election sign. So all of these are in the non-commercial sign area. And that's basically what a Supreme Court case said in regulating commercial signage and non-commercial signage. There's basically two types. You can't distinguish more than those two groups and talk about political as one thing, ideological as another, religious as something else. So I think we're probably in an area where adding language in that to further define subgroups of non-commercial signage may be difficult. I will talk to the city attorney about that. We can report back to the council about your comments and then staff's responses to that, and if there's an avenue for that. But I wanted to just put that out there for the Planning Commission to think about before you do a motion, and then we'll follow up one way or another regardless of what your motion is. But again, just to think about that. So I hope that helps.
It does, thank you. And if we make a motion, that's a recommendation to the city council to approve. And then before they approve, of course, they'll have some discourse. And between now and then, you'll do the research. They'll have more information with which to do that discourse.
Correct. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for it's a really good clarification. It doesn't sway my opinion, though. I still do think that a definition has to be added just because state ordinance has it for general election years where they have to be out within 10 days. So it could be a little bit more work on the city's part, get the lawyers in here, but if we can add that 10 days somehow to this, city council, I think that's what I'd like to have happen. So take it up, please.
Any good discussion? Anything else? Any other thoughts, Bird? Doesn't seem like it. I think, I guess, for what it's worth, which is not much, I think I like the max number of signs being in play versus no max. I think I agree with Mr. Gordon and the staff's thought that kind of follows the signage culture of Minnetonka. I am probably curious about limiting the signage per candidate, but that's more along the lines of what Commissioner Henry is, that it's a turnoff personally to see 5 people's names right in a row. So I would not maybe die on a hill there for that. And then I'm probably also pretty curious to hear the city council's belief on duration. I think that in some way helps kind of clean up post-election and get back to normal life. So for what it's worth, I'm intrigued by that, but I'm probably fine the way the language sits today as recommended by staff in the grand scheme of things, but I'd be curious for the city council members to contemplate that. So With that, I'm wondering if we would be willing to support a motion then tonight to move this to the city council as written, or if we feel like we need to adjust anything. Just curious where our heads are at.
Oh, based on what Mr. Gordon mentioned about the need for more research done by the city, I'd be fine with progressing this onto the city council just because we've made these comments and they've been pretty clear about what we recommend.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure we had the votes to move it forward. So, great. So with that, I will look for a motion for item 8B, an ordinance amending non-commercial sign regulations. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Banks,
I'll second.
second by Minion. Staff, please poll the commission.
Minion,
Vote for. I'm very much in support of the duration conversation as well.
Banks,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Chair Hansen.
Yes, and that is approved, and we'll move to the city council. Mr. Gordon, does that have a specific date that it goes to?
Yes, that will go on March 25th.
Okay, great. End of March. So we'll hear that here shortly. And then with that, commission, item 9 for us is adjournment. Would anyone like to make that motion?
Make the motion to
Motion by
adjourn.
Minion,
I'll second.
second by Banks, or sorry, second by Henry. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.